Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Hammer. I'm President and CEO of the Texas Association of Business. We're the state chamber, and I'm also on the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I do need to buy a car, but that's not why we are all here today. I'm proud to kick this off. Senator Ted Cruz is the job senator. Ted Cruz delivers for Texas, and I'm proud to be here today as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce officially endorses Senator Cruz for this key United States Senate seat. Texas and the United States, we need Senator Cruz to remain in the United States Senate so that Texas remains the economic powerhouse. And as a result of Senator Cruz's leadership, the state of Texas's economy is stronger than ever. And I also just want to say I appreciate everything that Senator Cruz has done over many years, including working in very important positions in the state of Texas to help build the Texas miracle. Right now, where we are standing in Texas, we are arguably not just in the healthiest economy in the country, but in the world, and it's no accident. And we need people like U.S. Senator Ted Cruz to remain in Washington so that Texas can continue to thrive. I'm going to mention a few items that Senator Cruz has led and championed in a bipartisan fashion to produce real results for the state of Texas. My favorite is that Cruz spearheaded the passage of the proposal to reform the presidential permitting process for border bridges across the Rio Grande in Brownsville, Laredo, Eagle Pass, and in four bridges total. This is a victory for Texas commerce that will bring billions of dollars to Texas. This is why this is so important. Texas and Mexico are each other's largest trading partners, $285 billion. Mexico is now the largest trading partner of the United States, almost at $1 trillion. Canada's 2, China's 3. As we nearshore and migrate economic activity from Asia to Texas and the United States, we need these new bridges. Senator Ted Cruz is literally building bridges of trade between Texas and Mexico. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. The expansion and construction of these bridges is the most significant trade legislative victory for Texas and the nation since the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA. And from highways to bridges to energy, Senator Cruz has been leading the fight to ensure that Texas remains an economic powerhouse. Now, we also know that Senator Cruz fights each and every day for energy in the state of Texas. At the Texas Association of Business, we're all the above. We're proud that Texas is the energy capital of the world. We know that Senator Cruz is fighting for our oil and gas industry. And here, there's an incredible contrast. In 2023, Congressman Allred sided with the Biden administration in a House vote to reverse the White House's pause on LNG exports. Texas is the largest exporter of natural gas in the country and one of the largest in the world. And I find it remarkable that anyone representing the state of Texas would vote that way. And by the way, that wouldn't only destroy the Texas economy, because a big part of our state's budget surplus and the money that schools in Texas, including right here in this region, receive are from oil and gas drilling. But it would also harm our allies. It's a dangerous world out there. Our European allies need Texas gas to stay warm in winter and to keep their factories humming. This would have destroyed that. And I just last week, Senator, was in Brownsville. two things are going on in Brownsville that are causing that region to just boom. One is SpaceX, and we'll at some point go to Mars, I'm sure. But the other is LNG exports. And if you shut down Texas LNG exports, you are going to be walloping the Texas economy. And Congressman Allred has voted twice against an effort to prohibit presidents from unilaterally banning fracking, an industry that has created 1.7 million jobs, increased wages, and benefited local economies. Fracking has changed the world and made it a much safer place, and we need to continue that activity for the Texas economy as well as for national security. I'll close by saying this. We need Senator Cruz to win. We need him to also be in a, and I'm going to be a little partisan here, so but I have to be. We need Senator Cruz to be chairman of the House Commerce Committee that oversees 40% of the nation's economy. We need Senator Cruz in the United States Senate as big portions of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expire, and the senator wrote very important pieces of that. If that bill is not renewed, basically every small business in Texas will see a significant tax increase, as will most taxpayers. And we know where Senator Cruz stands. He stands with the job creators and the workers of Texas. With that said, delighted to be here. Ted Cruz delivers for Texas. Ted Cruz delivers for the United States of America. Ted Cruz is the job senator. And Senator, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that you remain fighting for all of us in the United States Senate. Thank you.
So it's great to be with you today. I am Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne, representing the great state of Texas, where policies actually matter. We recognize the fact that you need American businesses to be competitive. We are seeing millions of people, businesses, move with their feet, vote with their feet to come to the wonderful state of Texas, because we actually understand the fact that regulations kill businesses, that businesses represent a phenomenal opportunity for our residents to be able to succeed. You can't just call it in. I look at the workers behind me. They come to work. They're here. They recognize the fact that you just can't call it in. You have to be there. Policies matter. When you vote against American businesses to increase their taxes, that's going to hurt all Americans. You cannot claim to be for Texas and yet vote against one of the largest drivers of our economy, American energy, and claim to be for Texans. You cannot claim to be for a safe Texas, have safe communities, and yet vote against border bills that would actually provide those resources necessary, that would actually protect our border. This is what we have seen from Ted Cruz's opponent. I have worked with this man. He is wonderful to the state. He understands business. He understands what our country needs to be able to succeed, to be able to compete with the rest of the world. He understands the foreign threats that we face. I am so happy, I am so gratified that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is giving their support, recognizing what the rest of the country recognizes as they all move to our states. Policies matter. Ted Cruz not only speaks the right speaks, but he also walks the walk. I've seen it firsthand. I'm proud to be able to endorse him. I'm proud to be able to be here with him today, and I'm proud to be able to call him our next Texas State Senator, our next Texas Senator. I am also wanting to introduce Neil Bradley, who is the Executive VP of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Neil?
Good morning. My name is Neil Bradley. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You know, one of the great things about being at the U.S. Chamber is we get a vantage point on 535 people that the American citizens send to Washington every 2 years to represent them. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. They're not all created equal. Some of them talk the talk, some of them walk the walk, and the ones who really make a difference are the ones that we're here to celebrate today. And that's Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Because there's a lot of people who can talk about being for business, they can talk about what they want to do in Washington, but there aren't that many that actually deliver. And Ted Cruz delivers, not just for Texas, but for the nation. You heard my good friend Glenn Hammer talk a little bit about what Ted Cruz has already done for the state of Texas and for our nation. But here's the deal. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. There's a lot of things that we need him to do for the next 6 years. You know, the people that we elect this November are going to have some important issues in front of them. What happens to those tax reforms? What happens to that lowering of business taxes and taxes on individuals and families? Does it all go away, or do we get to keep the policies that give us a thriving economy? You know, Senator Cruz led in 2017 on that tax reform, but he didn't stop there. One of the things that he's been doing is pushing tax policy that make investments in buildings and manufacturing sites like the one we're in today possible for the future. You know, as we travel around the country, one of the things that we often hear from our members, from business leaders, is the problem of regulation. It just feels like there's this entire tsunami of regulatory red tape coming in from Washington. Well, you know who can do something about that? The United States Congress. And you know who's in a perfect position to do something like that? The next chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. So that's what this election's about. This election's about the future. It's about whether or not we have someone who continues to deliver for Texas and for the nation, whether they understand what job creators go through, what businesses need in order to thrive and to succeed. And for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, this was a pretty easy decision, because Ted Cruz has a track record of being exactly that type of public official, and we are confident that he's going to do so for another 6 years and maybe even a little longer after that. So, on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I am pleased to extend our full and total endorsement to Ted Cruz for his re-election to the United States Senate. To Senator Cruz, our current and next Senator of Texas, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you're going to continue to do.
Well, Neil, thank you very much. Glenn, thank you very much. Beth, thank you very much. It is great to be with friends. Thank you all for hosting us. Thank you, everyone, for being here and letting us interrupt for a few minutes your busy workday. It is great to be here. Number one, I'm honored to receive the endorsement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That is a big deal. I'm proud to stand with you. I'm honored to have the support of the Texas Association of Business, which is fighting every day for jobs. And I'm honored to stand with workers and job creators throughout the state of Texas. In 12 years in the Senate, my number one priority every single day has been jobs, jobs, jobs. The reason is simple. That's the top priority of Texans. Every part of the state, whether it's East Texas or West Texas, whether it's the Panhandle or the Valley, Texans want jobs, we want more jobs, we want higher wages, we want more opportunity. And what I understand is that jobs don't come from some bureaucrat in a windowless office in Washington, D.C. They come from entrepreneurs. They come from small businesses. They come from leaders putting capital at risk to meet a need. But we also know that Washington can screw it up mightily. And if you want to create an environment where jobs are plentiful, the two best levers are tax reform and regulatory reform. Every time we lessen taxes, we simplify the tax code, every time we repeal job-killing regulations, the result is more jobs. You know, there's a satirical headline in the Babylon Bee. It says, Texas is building a wall on its southern border, consisting of nothing but discarded one-way U-Haul trucks from California. Now, there's an enormous amount of truth to that. Every day, for more than a decade, we have had over 1,000 people a day coming to Texas. Why? There are a lot of reasons, but the number one reason is Texas is where the jobs are. And in my view, this election for Senate is about one thing: keeping Texas, Texas. We can't screw that up. We want to remain an environment where jobs are plentiful. And by the way, the states that people are fleeing from, it's not complicated. They're coming from bright blue states with really high taxes and high regulations. They're coming from California and Illinois and New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, and they're coming to Texas because you can provide for your family, because your kids have a better future here, because your grandkids have a better future here. That's why people want to be in Texas. Now, I want to briefly talk about 5 legislative victories in my time in the Senate, every one of which is focused on jobs. Number 1, I-14. I-14 is going to be a brand new interstate. It's going to run from the Permian Basin, east through East Texas, ultimately all the way to Georgia and the Atlantic Ocean. I was the lead author of the legislation designating I-14. I joined up with Raphael Warnock. Raphael Warnock is a very liberal Democrat. He represents Georgia. Raphael and I went to the Senate floor to argue in favor of our legislation. I stood up and spoke in favor of it. Raphael stood up and spoke in favor of it. And then Tom Carper, who's a Democrat from Delaware, Tom stood up and said, you know what? If Cruz is for it and Warnock's for it, we all got to be for it. And it passed 100-0 on the floor of the Senate. That legislation is now designating a brand new interstate that will be able to take oil and gas, be able to take livestock and crops, be able to take people, be able to take troops and military equipment east to west all across Texas and all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Second legislative victory, I-27. I-27 is a major new interstate. It's going to run from Laredo north through West Texas, through the Panhandle, through New Mexico, ultimately all the way up to Canada. I-27 is also called the Ports to Plains corridor. That legislation, again, I was the lead author of that legislation. I joined together with Ben Ray Lujan. Ben Ray Lujan is a Democrat from New Mexico. The legislation was Cruz-Lujan. Again, we got bipartisan support, passed it through the Senate, passed it through the House. It's been signed into law. Now, let me tell you the benefits of I-27, and I'm going to rely on TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation. They conducted a comprehensive study of I-27, and they concluded that building that would result in a 76% return on investment, $3.4 billion in annual travel cost savings, more than 17,000 new jobs, and a $2.2 billion annual increase to state GDP. That's a second victory. Let me talk about a third, and it was one that Glenn referenced. There are 4 new bridges being built in South Texas. 2 in Laredo, 1 in Brownsville, 1 in Eagle Pass, all from Texas to Mexico. All of them were running into bureaucratic roadblocks in the Biden administration. And in particular, so to build any bridge in America right now, you have to go through what's called federal environmental NEPA review. And that can be a time-consuming and expensive process. To build an international bridge, a bridge that crosses an international border, you separately need a permit from the President of the United States. So if you're building a bridge to Mexico or to Canada, you got to get a presidential permit. Now, the way it used to operate is the President would grant those permits, conditional on the ultimate completion of the federal environmental NEPA review. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office, they reversed that process. They announced that they would grant 0 presidential permits for any cross-border bridges unless and until the federal environmental NEPA review had been fully completed. The impact of that decision was to delay every one of those bridges 3, 4, 5 years. So I found out about this issue about 2.5, 3 years ago when leaders from Laredo came to meet with me in D.C. They sat in my office, and this is elected leaders, this is business leaders, and they were frustrated out of their minds. And mind you, by the way, most of the elected leaders in Laredo are Democrats. And they were pulling their hair out at the Biden-Harris White House at why this Democrat White House was blocking these bridges. And they asked me, they said, Ted, can you help us with this? Can you get this fixed? I said, absolutely. Now, I got to tell you, somewhat naively, I thought it would be a simple matter. I thought I could make a phone call to the State Department. I could say, look, this is stupid. Change this. Well, I made that phone call, but the Biden State Department said, go jump in a lake. They had no interest in what I had to say. So the next stage is I worked to unify the congressional delegation in South Texas. I drafted a letter to Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. It was joined by John Cornyn, my colleague in the Senate. It was joined by Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, Monica de la Cruz, a Republican, Vicente Gonzalez, a Democrat, and Tony Gonzalez, a Republican. All of us joined the letter saying, this policy hurts South Texas, it hurts all of Texas, please change it. Again, the Biden administration said, go jump in a lake. So I drafted legislation to change it, legislation to expedite the permitting and to direct the administration to speed up granting the permitting. I introduced that in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, got bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans supported my legislation. We passed it through the Senate. We passed it through the House. It was signed into law on December 22nd of last year. Now, December 22nd happens to be my birthday. I thought that was a fantastic birthday present. The impact of that legislation, the permits have been granted now. It set a shot clock, it set a timer, and forced the White House to grant those permits. And let me give you a sense of the scope of how big a deal this is. Glenn made reference to it. The Texas Association of Business has described this as the most significant legislation for Texas-Mexico trade since the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Let me put this in scope. The World Trade Bridge in Laredo, Texas, is right now the largest land port in America. It's 8 lanes. On any given day, if you go down to the World Trade Bridge, you will see a line of 18-wheelers extending into Mexico 4, 5, 6 miles. And they'll just sit there all day waiting to cross that bridge. Now, mind you, when they're sitting there, their engines are running, they're spewing pollution in the air. It's terrible for the environment. It drives up cost. You have produce that's going bad as they're sitting there in the sun waiting to cross. The city of Laredo is proposing expanding that bridge from 8 lanes to 18 lanes. That is a massive expansion. They're also proposing a brand new bridge in Laredo called the 4-5 Bridge, and then another bridge in Brownsville and another bridge in Eagle Pass. Those bridges, when completed, every year, Texas and Mexico does roughly $800 billion in trade. When those bridges are completed, it will mean billions of dollars of new investment in Texas. It will mean thousands and thousands of high-paying jobs. It will benefit Texas farmers and ranchers and manufacturers and small businesses. It will benefit this car dealership by reducing the cost of cars and trucks coming across the border. And by the way a whole lot of cars and trucks are made is the process. We got a lot of factories in Texas, and you have part of the manufacturing in Texas, and then they ship the parts down to Mexico. They do more manufacturing there, and a given car or truck can go back and forth across the border 2-3 times as they assemble different parts of it. So speeding up that process reduced costs for consumers significantly. That's a third victory. Fourth victory, space. You know, Glenn made reference to SpaceX down in Brownsville. Space is incredibly important. For the last decade, every single major piece of space legislation, the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, the NASA reauthorization, 2 NASA reauthorizations, all 3 of those bills I was the lead author of, joining with Democrats to author legislation investing in space, investing in NASA, investing in commercial space. You go down to Boca Chica, which is right by Brownsville. You look, I've been to the SpaceX factory. It is amazing. That used to be essentially an abandoned piece of sand. It is now a factory that is producing a rocket ship a month with a precision down to the 10th of a millimeter. And they are blasting off from down at the southern tip of Texas. It is amazing to see. It also, you want to talk about innovation. Used to be in space, you fire rockets into space and the rockets are just discarded. You fire them once and you're done. Well, SpaceX said, well, the heck with that, how about we reuse them? And everyone said, well, you can't do that, that's ridiculous. And they said, sure we can. And if you look now at their rockets, they launch up to deliver the payload, they come back in, and you see this in Boca Chica. They have what they call chopsticks, which are these gigantic arms that will reach up and catch the rocket as it's coming down and put it back on the landing pad. It is extraordinary. And the legislation streamlining and investing in commercial space has helped produce thousands and thousands of high-paying jobs in Texas. Fifth and final example, the FAA reauthorization bill. Again, I was the lead author of that in conjunction with Maria Cantwell. Maria Cantwell is a Democrat. She is the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. I'm the ranking member on the Senate Commerce Committee. The FAA reauthorization bill is landmark legislation, $110 billion investing in aviation, investing, number one, in safety. The number one priority of aviation has to be safety. Every one of us, we put our families on planes. You want to make sure your kids are all right when the plane lands. That's got to be job one. But number two, if you care about jobs, aviation is critical. Texas is a massive aviation hub. We have multiple major airlines based here in Texas. We have huge and enormously efficient airports in Texas. You look at aviation produces hundreds of thousands of jobs here in Texas, and millions of jobs depend indirectly on aviation. The FAA reauthorization bill invests $4 billion in airports in Texas and across the country. In new technology, it directs the FAA to hire the maximum number of air traffic controllers. That increases safety, and it also reduces delays. It also invests in technology on runways to avoid the potential for runway collisions. We've seen multiple near misses. Austin Bergstrom Airport, there was a Southwest plane taking off, and a FedEx plane came within 50 feet of landing on top of it. Now, I can't count how many times I've sat in a Southwest plane at Austin Bergstrom Airport getting ready to take off, and never once did I think, you know, a plane might land on top of us and kill all of us. But we came within 50 feet of that happening in Texas. So this invests in technology to prevent that from happening. There's also a huge victory for Texas, in particular in that bill, which concerns the city of San Antonio. Has never had a direct flight to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. And this is something the people of San Antonio have been fighting 20 years for. Again, this came to my attention, much like the bridges in Laredo, when I was meeting with the city leaders from San Antonio, again, mostly elected Democrats, and business leaders, and they said, look, we want a direct flight to Reagan. It's not right that we don't have it. They'd been trying for 20 years. They said, Ted, will you lead the fight to make this happen? I said, absolutely. So San Antonio is the 7th largest city in America. It's widely called Military City USA. It has a huge military population, both active duty and veterans. You look at Reagan Airport, it is right next to the Pentagon. It is right next to Arlington Memorial Cemetery. And so in the FAA bill, I drafted the provision directing the FAA to expand the number of slots so San Antonio could have a flight to and from Reagan. Now, here's what's interesting. This was the single biggest battle on the entire bill. And the Democrat senators from Virginia and Maryland vigorously opposed this provision. It was a massive battle. It was a battle on the floor that delayed the bill several days. It threatened to derail the entire bill. Well, I'm proud to tell you at the end of the day, Texas won. The provision is in there. The final vote on the floor of the Senate was 88-4. The 4 were the 2 Virginia and the 2 Maryland senators, so it was over the flight to San Antonio, and San Antonio will have that direct flight this year as a victory for Texas. So I mention those 5 examples because you often see in the news battles that I'm having, typically with Democrats, over higher taxes, over more spending, over more debt, over more regulations, over open borders, over assaults on our constitutional liberties. And I'm proud to lead the fight against any policies that hurt Texas. But at the same time, it is also an integral part of my job to pass positive pro-growth, pro-jobs legislation. In my 12 years in the Senate, I've authored and passed 100 separate pieces of legislation delivering jobs to the state of Texas. Let me say one final point, and then we'll wrap up and open for questions. In the next Congress, we're going to have huge battles over taxes, regulation, and energy. And I got to say, in this election, the contrast between me and my opponent, Congressman Colin Allred, could not be more stark. When it comes to taxes, as y'all know, most of the 2017 tax cuts are expiring next year. At the top of the ticket, Donald Trump has said he would extend those tax cuts. Kamala Harris has said she would allow them to expire. The Wall Street Journal has described this election as a $6 trillion election. That's the delta between how much your taxes go up if Democrats are in control versus how much they go down. And by the way, if we have Republican majorities, I'm going to fight to make the tax cuts bigger and bolder, because that's how you produce jobs. But $6 trillion on the bottom line for businesses and job creators, on the bottom lines for families, this is a ton of taxes. Now, you look at Colin Allred. In his first 4 years in Congress, Colin Allred voted with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time, on every single vote. So remember, when you hear folks in the media trying to tell you that he's somehow moderate, do you think Nancy Pelosi is somehow moderate? Because their voting records were identical. That means he voted over and over again for higher taxes. That means he voted over and over again for more spending. That means he voted over and over again for more debt. Now, I'm not aware that he has actually said what he would do on the tax cuts, because he doesn't do what we're doing here, which is press conferences. I think this is the 13th press conference I've done in the past 6 weeks. He went 60 days without doing a single one. So he doesn't answer questions, but I have to assume, since he's endorsed Kamala Harris for president, that he agrees that we should let the tax cuts expire. I don't know, Jack, you ought to try asking him that, because I don't think he said it publicly, but he won't answer you, so good luck with that. But higher taxes for Texas small businesses and families, that's at stake. Regulations and energy. Look, energy is critical. If you don't like inflation, one of the biggest drivers of inflation is the higher cost of energy. And understand, the higher cost of energy is because the Biden-Harris administration has waged a regulatory war on oil and gas produced in Texas. And I've got to say, in that regulatory war, Colin Allred signed up and said, put me on the side of the people attacking Texas and attacking jobs. Colin Allred has voted against fracking not once but twice on the floor of the House. Fracking is what has produced this incredible renaissance, this abundance of oil and gas. It has unlocked shale reserves in Texas. Colin Allred is against those jobs and for higher cost at the gas pump and everywhere else. But not only that, there are very few policies of the Biden-Harris administration that are more indefensible than what Joe Biden announced earlier this year, which is a ban on future permits to export liquid natural gas. Now, Texas is a powerhouse. We are the largest producer of oil and gas in America. America is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. That ban on LNG exports is unequivocally harmful. It kills jobs in the state of Texas. It hurts our allies who desperately want Texas LNG. It helps our enemies. It forces Europe to buy gas from countries like Russia, like Iran and Venezuela, instead of from Texas, and it hurts the environment. Why? Because gas is produced in Texas much more cleanly than it is in Russia or Iran or Venezuela. It was a policy that I think was spiteful. The White House was mad that Texas was fighting to secure our own border, and they decided, let's punish Texas and let's hurt Texas jobs. Well, the House of Representatives stood up and voted to revoke Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's ban on LNG exports on new permits, and Colin Allred voted with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and against jobs in the state of Texas. I've spent 12 years as the leading defender of energy and oil and gas and all of the above jobs in Texas. That's a big deal, and it's why I'm proud to stand with the Chamber of Commerce and the Texas Association of Business and with Texas small businesses and workers throughout the state. And with that, we're happy to take any questions. Jack.
Yeah, well, let's start with when the U.S. Chamber did support him. That was in his race for Congress and his first and his second re-elects. But every race for Senate, race for congressional districts, is about a choice. And we're not a partisan organization at the U.S. Chamber. We look at the track records of the candidates who are running, and it's our job to evaluate who do we think the best candidate is if you believe in economic growth and job creation and improving the lives of the American people. And on that basis, this is a clear-cut, easy decision. Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, for the accomplishments that he's already made for the state of Texas and for the nation, and for his commitments on policies going forward, is the clear-cut candidate if you believe in jobs and economic growth and American prosperity. So that's why we're pleased to endorse him today, not just for what he's already done, but for what he promises to do. This is a race for the United States Senate. We need the best pro-job senator that we can get out of the state of Texas, and that's Senator Ted Cruz. Well, that's pretty simple. Senator Cruz is better for the workers, particularly on the question of taxes. Let's understand what happens when you raise taxes. It's not some faceless person who ends up paying that. If you raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, about 30% of that additional tax increase actually falls on consumers in the form of higher prices. So if you think prices are high now, wait until we pass along 30% of that extra tax increase along to American consumers. Where does about another third of it fall? It actually falls on workers. It means lower wages going forward. And so this is what Senator Cruz understands so well, that when you tax businesses, you take away the money that they need to be able to invest in their facilities, to build buildings like this, to buy equipment, and to pay their workers. And what that means is that they have fewer workers making less money, and we face higher prices. And so that's why the choice on things like business taxes is fairly simple, because when someone tells you that they're going to tax business, hold on to your wallet, because you're going to pay more when you go out shopping, and you're going to have less in your checking account when your paycheck comes the next pay period. And that's what's at stake in this next election. And
Jack, let me add to that. The proof is in the pudding. The 2017 tax cuts, which were the largest tax cuts in a generation, produced incredible results across the country, benefited 30 million Texans. As a result of those tax cuts, we saw the lowest rate of unemployment in 50 years. Those tax cuts helped produce the lowest rate of African American unemployment ever recorded. They also helped produce the lowest rate of Hispanic unemployment ever recorded in our nation's history. They produced the lowest rate of unemployment for women in 70 years. They produced the lowest rate of unemployment for young people in 70 years. They had enormous effect. And by the way, Congressman Allred, he was not in Congress at the time, but running for Congress, he was explicit. He opposed those tax cuts. And so understand, this election, it's a choice on many fronts, but one of the fronts is, if Congressman Allred becomes your senator, he will raise your taxes. If I remain your senator, I will fight to cut your taxes. That is a very simple and clear choice. And understand, that is both for families and for job creators. So the position of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Colin Allred is jack up the taxes on all the small businesses and all the job creators. Well, we're in a car dealership. What do folks here think if you jack up the taxes on the car dealership, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to see the prices go up, so consumers are going to get hit. You're going to see wages go down, and some of you may lose your jobs. That's what happened when government goes to your employer and says, okay, we want millions more. That means that's money you can't pay workers. That means that's money you got to extract in prices. That's the position of Colin Allred. If you think trillions of taxes more is good for Texas, well, I'm sure that's what Colin Allred is telling his hard-left Democrat supporters, but I think you ought to ask the state of California. You ought to ask the state of New York. You ought to ask the state of New Jersey. You ought to ask the state of Connecticut. We know what happens with that approach, which is tax the hell out of them, regulate the hell out of them, and you know what happens? People get in a U-Haul and they leave because they can't get a job. We don't want that to happen to Texas. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Right. Well, listen, thank you for your leadership running your restaurant, and thank you for being a small business owner. And I got to say, first of all, so you're standing next to my dad, who lives in Carrollton as well. So I grew up, my parents were small business owners, and I grew up in Houston. They owned a small business, a seismic data processing company in the oil and gas business. And so my dad, my first job, my dad hired me when I was 8 years old as a computer operator. My dad paid me $1 an hour. And he would have me work a double shift on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. Now, he wasn't mean about it. He'd bring me a plate of turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce. He was nice, but he's like, look, get back to work. And so I worked for several years at $1 an hour. When I was 11, I came into my dad's office. He had a big old desk. He liked his big desk. And I came into my dad's office and I said, Dad, I'm doing the same job that college kids are doing. You're paying the college kids $5 an hour. You're paying me $1 an hour. You're exploiting me because I'm your son. And he cracked up laughing. And he said, well, I was waiting for you to figure that out. And so my first raise I ever got was a 400% raise from $1 an hour to $5 an hour. My dad said, well, I wasn't going to give it to you until you had the sense to ask for it. But look, I know the challenges small businesses have. And by the way, in terms of the challenges, look, I was in high school in the 80s when oil collapsed. And the entire state of Texas felt it, and felt it hard. And in our family, we went bankrupt. We lost our business, we lost our home, we lost everything. And so when I went off to high school, I was 17, my parents were in bankruptcy. And so I was on my own, and I went through, I still remember that day, it was a Monday, my father came home with 25 employees. He had 25 employees, I was a kid. But he had 25 employees, and on that one day, he had to lay off 19 of those employees. And I've never seen my father more unhappy. He looked like he had been beaten with a 2x4. That it broke his heart. And he had employees who argued with him, said, Raphael, I'm not leaving. And he said, look, you have a family, you have kids. I can't pay you. I don't have the money to pay you. So it's hard. I understand how difficult it is to run a small business. By the way, if you care about jobs, it's real simple. You care about small businesses. Why? 2/3 of all new jobs in America come from small businesses. If you create an environment where small businesses are growing and prospering and expanding, you have lots and lots of jobs. If you create an environment where you're pounding the living daylights out of small businesses, the jobs disappear. So your question specifically was about inflation. And listen, inflation is hurting Texans every day. You feel it when you go to the grocery store. You feel it when you go to the gas pump. You feel it when you pay your electricity bill every month. You feel it on rent. You feel it on lumber. You feel it especially on mortgages. And I got to say, by the way, a young couple goes to buy their first house, and they're discovering now that a 7.5% mortgage is very different than a 2.5% mortgage. And it means you get about half the house you used to be able to get just a few years ago. So inflation is a very cruel tax. And you know, it's interesting. Jack asked a minute ago about Colin Allred and Kamala Harris wanting to raise taxes. Inflation is a tax on everyone. And it particularly hurts the most vulnerable, young people coming out of school, seniors with fixed incomes, who their costs are not fixed and they keep going up. Seniors have been hammered by inflation. Now, what causes it? A couple of things. Number one, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Colin Allred, when they had Democrat control of the White House, the House, and Senate, they went on a massive spending spree. They spent trillions of dollars we didn't have. They borrowed trillions of dollars we didn't have, and they ran the printing presses and printed trillions of dollars we didn't have. I and many others said, if you do this, you will cause serious inflation. And they laughed at us. They said, that is ridiculous. That's not true. It will not happen. By the way, Colin Allred voted for every penny of that spending. Well, when you print a bunch of money, you devalue the value of the money in your pocket. That causes inflation. The second driver of inflation has been the war on oil and gas and energy. And the Biden-Harris administration has issued regulation after regulation after regulation, hammering oil and gas and driving up costs. And oil and gas costs are not just when you fill up your tank. They're also at the grocery store. So big ingredient, for example, in fertilizer if you're growing crops. And so farmers get hammered by rising energy costs. Not only that, their tractor, whether they're planting or harvesting their crops, they got to fill the tractor, and so the cost of diesel. Not only that, the cost of transporting their crops from the farm to the warehouse to the grocery store, all of those costs drive up inflation. Now, your question was a very good one. How do we fix that? We fix that a couple of things. Number one, by extending the tax cuts, and I hope by increasing the tax cuts, we will generate economic growth and productivity. That's one way you combat it. A second way you combat it, if Donald Trump is reelected in November, and I very much hope that he is, on January 20th of next year, the war on oil and gas and Texas energy will end. And let me give a very specific example. So in Brownsville, I was down in Brownsville last week. I was at UT-RGV, UT Rio Grande Valley. You know, UT-RGV is 34,000 students. It's incredible. And historically, look, the valley has been challenged socioeconomically. There's a lot of poverty. There's been a brain drain where young people leave the valley and they come to Dallas or they come to Houston because there weren't good jobs there. Well, you now have in Brownsville, number one, SpaceX. We talked about that already, but that's got a ton of high-paying jobs. Number two, UT-RGV just announced a partnership with Los Alamos National Laboratory to do work on nuclear science. That's going to be incredibly important for engineers down in the valley. But number three, Next Generation has a massive export terminal for LNG, for liquid natural gas, $18 billion. Enormously impactful, thousands and thousands of jobs. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, the D.C. Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, a panel that consisted of a Biden judge and 2 Obama judges, revoked the permit for the LNG export plant in Brownsville. What does that mean? If that doesn't get reversed in the court, that $18 billion goes away. About 6,000 high-paying jobs in the valley disappear because when you put left-wing radicals on the court that oppose jobs, it has a very real effect of destroying jobs. And you want to know one of the consequences of this race? If Colin Allred had been in the Senate, he would happily vote to confirm the kind of radical judges that will destroy jobs. Whereas on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I fight for judges that will follow the law and not impose their radical policies in a way that hurts Texas. All right, let's do one final question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, look, thank you for that question. I am a passionate supporter of school choice. I have been deeply active in the school choice movement for 30 years. I believe school choice is the civil rights battle of the 21st century. And when it comes to school choice, I think every child in Texas deserves access to a quality education regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your wealth, regardless of your zip code. And when it comes to school choice, so the single legislative achievement that I'm proud of in my time in the Senate concerns school choice. And it was actually as part of the 2017 tax cuts. I authored an amendment to expand College 529 savings plans to include K-12 education. And College 529 savings plans are tax advantage plans that parents and grandparents can save for their kids and grandkids. My amendment, we voted on it about midnight on the Senate floor. It was a 50-50 vote. It was evenly divided. The Vice President came to the floor of the Senate about 1 in the morning, cast the tie-breaking vote. Under that provision, which is now law, parents and grandparents can save not just for college, but also for K-12 education, for public school, private school, parochial school, religious school, your choice, up to $10,000 per child per year. It remains the single most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever been enacted. And it benefits up to 50 million school kids across this country. I got to say, the position of Democrats on education may be even more defensible than the position of Colin Allred and Democrats in support of open borders. It may be even more indefensible than their position in support of higher taxes and higher debt. Why? Because the position of Colin Allred and Democrats is to trap children in schools that are failing. And I got to say, COVID opened a lot of people's eyes. COVID opened a lot of people's eyes to what was being taught to kids, and a lot of parents got horrified as they saw what was being taught to their children. And if you look at, I think the parents and kids ought to be able to choose the best education for that child. And I got to tell you also, in the wake of COVID, I talked about people moving from blue states to red states. There was a massive difference, which is in Texas, there was a brief shutdown and then we reopened schools. We reopened businesses. We said we're going back to work, we're going back to school, we're going back to church. We're not shutting the state of Texas down. Well, a lot of blue states kept their schools shut down for a year or longer. There were tens of millions of school kids who didn't go to school. Look, I remember when schools were shut down, Heidi and I, our girls are 13 and 16 now, so they were younger then. Heidi and I, both of us, we would divvy it up. I got the easier job. I got our daughter. Heidi got the harder job. She got our eldest daughter. We had 2 computers going. We're sitting there with them while they're online. And look, it was hard. We had 2 parents in the house. It was hard for us. I can't imagine what it's like as a single mom. If you had 3, 4, 5 kids, you're trying to work a job or 2. What it meant for millions of kids is they didn't go to school because the school was shut down. And I'll tell you, on the Senate floor, I talked about the trillions of dollars Democrats spent. Their first big, massive spending bill. They were spending tens of billions of dollars for education. I had an amendment that I forced a vote for on the Senate floor, and it said the following. It said, okay, every school can continue to receive every penny of the federal money it is receiving already. But the new billions of dollars that are being appropriated right now, this is what I said to my Democrat colleagues. My amendment said the following. The school can receive it if it's open. But if it's not open, if the school is shut down and kids are not allowed to attend in-person school 5 days a week, then those schools, they still get all the money they got yesterday, but they don't get new money while the school is shut down to not be open. And instead, that money that you're appropriating will go to each child in the form of a $10,000 scholarship per child for them to go to school while the schools are shut down. It was an emergency provision. We voted on the Senate floor. It was a straight party line vote. It failed by 1 vote. Every Democrat senator, I went to Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin had very briefly voted in favor of my 529 amendment until Chuck Schumer and the Democrats yelled at him and forced him to change his vote. I said, Joe, you know what is happening to kids is wrong. And he just said, no, I can't do it. Understand the consequence of this. Look at the data. As a result of those school shutdowns, we saw the biggest learning loss ever recorded and the biggest increase in the racial gap, in the gap of African American kids and Hispanic kids from Anglo kids. That increased the most that has ever been recorded. That's what Democrat shutdowns did, is they hurt African American children and Hispanic children profoundly. And the data shows those kids who didn't go to school for a year, they will never fully catch up. They will be hurt the rest of their life. So when it comes to school choice, I'm proud to say I will fight for the kids of Texas with every breath in my body. Kids deserve an excellent education. When my dad came as an immigrant from Cuba in 1957 as an 18-year-old kid who couldn't speak English, he was able to get an education at UT, and because he got an education, he could work towards the American dream. We need to fight for education for every kid. All right, thank you guys, appreciate it.